I should probably use this as the thumbnail for this little thing that we're doing, but I don't know what we're doing. Kind of, sort of. So here's the deal, right? I think it was about a decade ago or something to that extent, that I did a little video on the Atari Flashback. The very first Atari Flashback plug-and-play system back in 2004. This is the box that it is in now, because I don't have the original box because that is long gone. I had the manual stored away somewhere. I'll see if I could find it, if I can find the time later on. But what I really wanted to do, the original plan for this was, it's 2024, figured 20th anniversary of the original Atari Flashback, and coincidentally I also picked up the Atari Flashback 2, which was the sequel system to this, and so I wanted to look back on this. I did a video on that. That's in the back burner waiting for this to come out, and then that'll come out, and that'll be a huge time discrepancy, but that shit nobody's going to care about. Anyway, so I wanted to do this video last year to commemorate the 20th anniversary of the Atari Flashback circa 2004, but then shit happened. I wanted to do it earlier in the year because I had a bit of time, and then the embolism hit, and so better late than never, I suppose. And we, like I said, we did a video on this, I think about a decade ago, and I figured it would be a nice way to sort of revisit and I don't know, do a little bit of comparison. So we got the Sega Genesis Mini box, which it's an empty box. It's the Genesis Mini 2, the second model, which has Sega CD games on it, and this has been a joy to play with, and I was happy to be able to get this because it wasn't easy to get my hands on this. Lots of loops to go through, especially in Canada, to get one of these things, but I was able to snag one. Kind of wish I was able to get the PC Engine one, but that's an arm and a leg that I could easily spend on a Switch 2 around these parts especially. But that's another story for another time that nobody's going to care about. Anywho, so I figure we revisit the Atari Flashback. For those of you who don't know what an Atari Flashback is a plug-and-play system from 2004. This is what it looks like, and you'll notice that it's not a modeled after the Atari 2600 video computer system, which is what most of these Atari Flashback units would mold themselves after, starting with the next model, which you'll see in the next video that was done months ago. Funny how things like that work. Right, so anyways, so I got this thing. It's rather tiny. It's modeled after an Atari 7800 Pro system, which, for point of reference, I've got that here, and I'm going to raise the camera a bit. There we go. Come on. There we go. So, Atari Flashback, Atari 7800. I actually have two of these for some reason. They both work. Thank goodness. They both work. But I grabbed another one somewhere along the way because, you know, just in case. Because these things are like 30, 40, almost half a century old, so it's bound to happen that these things sooner or later will go belly up, that sort of thing. Anyways, so what this is, it's a plug-and-play system. It's got audio, video, composite, no stereo sound. It's mono. There's a reason for that. It's got power adapter barrel. It's got a power button. It's got a reset button. It's a very basic unit. You'll notice it doesn't have difficulty switches. It does not have game select switch. It doesn't have a pause button, which it doesn't have the buttons that this thing does. Power, pause, select, reset. switches, lovely switches that you can't see. There you go. Now you can see. This doesn't have that because this is not an Atari system. This is NES on a chip. It's a Famiclone with 20 built-in Atari games. A handful of them are Atari 7800 games, which is the only time that anyone remembers that the Atari 700 existed until recently, I guess. I guess to be fair, you know, once they got the Atari box, Atari VCS PC Gimmick that they did the Kickstarter on ages ago, which, hey, I make fun of that thing back in the day about the, but it did come out and it's available for purchase, and yeah, well, that's another story for another time to be told by somebody else, presumably. But yeah, this is NES on a chip, so it doesn't play like an Atari. It tries to. It's a Famiclone with 20 built-in Atari games. I need to stress this because the games that you're going to play on this, they may somewhat look like Atari, but it doesn't play like Atari. It doesn't sound like Atari. And actually, to tell you the truth, sometimes they don't even look like Atari. They look like fair approximations, kind of, sort of, but not the same thing. So the general idea I wanted to do, jazz hands, and I guess we could showcase the other stuff that we have. These are the controllers that they come with. These are your Atari Flashback joysticks, your Pro Line controllers, which, point of reference, this is your Atari Pro Line joystick. About as long as the actual console, amazingly enough, but half the size. And I don't know. This is what I had when this is my first video game controller, by the way, kids, because the Atari 7800 was my first video game console, and this is what I had to work with back in the day. And I don't know how I did it, because nowadays I can't play with this. But then again, I can't play with anything that isn't a gamepad, so that's just me, or an arcade stick even. But even an arcade stick, anyways, that's a different story. So anyways, this is what you're stuck with. And yes, it uses the 9-pin connector, but don't expect this thing to work with your traditional Atari controllers. It won't work with this. It won't work with the classic one. It won't even work with the won't work with that, obviously, but that's another story entirely. I don't have them. You know, I was... Oh, wait, here we are. It won't work with this, though to be fair, I don't think anybody would want to play with these, but these aren't too bad. I played all the Atari stuff with this nowadays, and I don't think it's bad. I've played with worse, far worse. This is one of these things that are not the greatest things, but this is all you had to work with this. If you don't have these, you're fucked, pretty much, unless you could find some other Nintendo controller that also 9-pin. So that's exciting. Anyways, so the idea that I have is that we're going to sample all 20 games, which, by the way, it's not going to be HD. It's probably going to be a DVD rip. So the quality isn't going to be fantastic, as it were, but it will suffice for our purposes. And I'll show off some equivalent Atari footage from actual Atari hardware, or worst comes to worst, one of the emulated equivalents, because that will work too. Just to give you an idea of how these compare with the actual Atari games that they're based on, because again, they're not the actual Atari games, they're not even emulated versions of the Atari games, they're recreations on a Famiclone thing. So, yeah, we might as well dive into it and see how bad these things really are. I haven't tested this. I haven't plugged this thing in a long time, so I'm hoping it works. Otherwise, we'll have to use recycled footage from ages ago, and yeah, that's all I got. Be back in a bit.
Okie doke, we are up and running. We are on the Atari Flashback Classic Game Console main menu. As you can see, you highlight a cartridge, the title pops up, you press a button, and you start the game. And if you select the cartridge slot, you get this little screen sort of telling you a little bit about the inspiration for this classic Atari Flashback console, the Atari 7800. The only flashback unit to take inspiration from the 7800 or include 7800 games such as it is, as the rest of the line would be Atari 2600 inspired units and that sort of thing. So I like the layout. They got the console in the middle, you got the stack of cartridges on each side, and you highlight a cartridge, and it's nice and a little creative, that sort of thing. Not much to it, nothing too fancy, but it gets the job done. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you some gameplay from each of the 20 games featured as they're presented on the flashback. I'll tell you a little bit about it, and then I'll show some Atari footage from either the original cartridges or the official emulated versions, whatever I have available, to sort of help you compare and contrast between the flashback versions and the Atari originals, such as it is. Because there are differences, since the Atari originals are the original Atari games, and this is basically NES on a chip. So that's pretty much the idea, more or less. So we're going to cycle through the cartridges again, and I'm going to give you a chance to listen to the sound effect. Same sound effect that would play on various NES multi-carts, those 110 multi-carts. So we're going to start off with Adventure, which is an Atari classic. You control a square thing, and you have to get a chalice from one castle, bring it back to your home castle, and that's pretty much the deal. So we're going to play the basic game of Atari. Those sound effects sound eerily familiar to me. I know I heard them from somewhere. Yeah, we're just going to play a basic game of Adventure. Obviously, we have 3 difficulty settings, each one more complex than the other, but I'm going to play a nice basic game. Oh, I know where these sounds are from. It's Gomoku Narabe for the Family Computer, one of the original Pulse Line games from 1983 from the console's launch, and a favorite to put on many a NES multi-cart thing. Listen to the sound effects. Do they not sound familiar? Do they not sound the same? Aside from the fact that it's NES on a chip, there's a slight difference, but same sound effects as in the adventure game we're just playing. We're going to go back to that because, quite frankly, the gameplay here is embarrassing. I was never good at this. So we'll go back to the part where we get to the closing moments of adventure so you could enjoy the flashing colors and shit. Very exciting. Less painful than I thought it was going to be. So now we're going to switch over to Adventure on 2600 via Atari 50 since I don't have the actual cartridge. So here's Adventure on the 2600 via Atari 50. Obviously, you could tell right away. Different sound effects. Graphics more or less the same. as the flashback version, or vice versa. But, yeah, so we're going to play through a small kingdom of adventure. Oh, by the way, I need to kill the other dragon. The other dragon duck thing. Positioning is important in trying to stab a dragon thing. So now we could get the key. But yeah, pretty much, Adventure is a fairly simple game to recreate. I think, at least. Because it's mostly solid shapes and things of that nature. And the sound effects, you could do whatever. But this is the only extended gameplay you're going to see on this. You could grab the bridge for some reason. I don't know why. I think it's relevant in the full kingdom campaign. We're playing the small kingdom because I'm trying to keep this brief. But anyways, enjoy the ending. See, the colors flash a little nicer here than on the flashback version. Anyways, let's get to the other games. Okay, so next up we have Air Sea Battle, which I believe is one of the original Atari VCS cartridges from 1977, back when two-player only games were a common thing, such as combat. You don't have combat, you have this, where you move your cursor thing with the stick to aim your cannon, and you shoot the planes, and whoever scores the more hits at the end of a time interval wins, and that sort of thing. It's very basic, but there's a bunch of game variations on there, so it's not just cannons and stuff like that. I think there's also one where you're dropping charges, or maybe I'm thinking something else, but all these things start to blend after a while. Anyways, not much to it. It's white noise. The gradient isn't all that fantastic. I think it looks better on 2600. I'm pretty sure it looks better on 2600. We're not going to waste a whole lot of time because it's a fairly simple game. So let's just switch over to the proper 2600 footage of Air Sea Battle. And admittedly, the sound effects in the 2600 original are much rougher, all things considered. However, the gradient effect of the background is much nicer here than in the flashback version, which is not much of a surprise. 2600 games usually have nice gradient effects, especially the later Activision releases. And just to confirm that I'm not entirely crazy, here's some footage of the alternate sea battle portion of the package, which has you bombing subs and vice versa. So that's something. Anyways, moving right along. Okay, so our third game on the flashback is our first 7800 game on the system. It's Asteroids. A surprise to me that they actually made a 7800 version of Asteroids, but there you go. They could have gone with the 2600 version that most people would probably be familiar with. As far as I call, I think more people are familiar with the arcade version that's vector-based. But then there's some old people who played it on their 2600s and remember the one with the colored blocks and stuff like that. But we don't have that. We have the 7800 version, the one with the surface craters, the nicer looking asteroids. This sounds like ass, and it plays even worse, to be honest with you. The controls are, the controllers don't help. They're not fantastic, but the controls themselves aren't all that great either. Your ship moves around rather. Your ship is supposed to have a little bit of it's supposed to be like hyperdrive. It's not supposed to be stop and go. You're supposed to have a little momentum, that sort of thing. At least that's what I recall Asteroids feeling like. This feels like, that crashed. Anyways. It looks the part at least. It doesn't animate as well because, I don't know, it's 5 frames a second, I guess? Or something? I don't know. But, I don't know. If you want Asteroids on NES, this is the closest thing you're going to get to it. But I'd much rather play Asteroids on Atari 7800, which we're going to do right now. And so this is the actual 7800 version of Asteroids, and just look at the way it moves. Just look at the way that it animates and scrolls. They changed the font as well from here to the flashback version, but just the way that the asteroids are moving, it's not jerky, and they obviously look a lot nicer on the 7800. The rotation is nice and slick with the surface craters, those wonderful surface craters. The movement is true to the arcade asteroids. I mean, come on, there's no comparison. Asteroids on the Atari Flashback 2004 pales in comparison to its 7800 inspiration, and we can move on from this point. Next up, we have Battlezone, the 1983 2600 port of the 1980 vector-based arcade game. And before we get to the flashback footage, let's sample the 2600 version, the actual 2600 version. They obviously couldn't recreate the vector-based graphics, but what they were able to pull off on the 2600 in 1983, mind you, a few years after the launch, is still pretty damn impressive. The static screen is what I use for most of my videos. That's how good it is. It's an example of what you could do on the 2600 hardware if you put your mind and effort and time and all that jazz into it, if you give a damn about producing a good product. And then we get to the flashback footage, which is far less impressive. It obviously doesn't look the same. It doesn't sound the same. It doesn't particularly control all that well, and yeah. Anyways. If you want to have Battlezone on the NES, you could probably rip this on a ROM or whatever, I guess, I suppose. I don't know, but don't call this the 2600 version of Battlezone and have a game that looks nothing like it. I'd appreciate that. That's a lie. I hate you. Bye. Anyways, moving on. Next game is Breakout from 1978 on the 2600 based on the 1976 arcade game, and this is one of the few paddle controller based things where you use a paddle controller, the knob thing. And I don't know, those of you who frequent my channel for all these years, my condolences, but you already know my aversion to playing these sort of games with a standard digital pad, let alone a stick that isn't all that well designed and not that responsive, whether it's due to design issues or just the ravages of time. Yeah, so I'm not going to waste a whole lot of time on this. Here's some 2600 footage from Atari 50 since I don't have the original cartridge. Uses analog controls for smoother movement, but it doesn't replace the feel of having a knob at your hand to twist and turn and have that precise movement. And we're just going to move on before this gets any more awkward. Anyways. Next up, we have Canyon Bomber from 1979 based on the 1977 arcade game. This one courtesy of David Crane, no less, long before he conceived Pitfall and all those wonderful games from Activision. He came up with this thing, which is a port of an arcade game where you dropped bombs in a canyon of rocks. You couldn't do the rocks, so you'd have solid lines of blocks and stuff. It's not very exciting in a general basis, and the sound effects in this flashback version aren't particularly inspired. Fortunately, there's a sea battle variant where you can move your cursor thing with the lines to sort of gauge the depth charges and aim your bombs and stuff, then knock off all the subs and stuff. Again, a two-player only game. Just for completionist sakes, let's check out the 2600 version. And well, the gradient effect on the 2600 version is much more natural. It doesn't look as ugly. And let's switch to the canyon bombing portion of the game. It's it's okay, I guess, right? You know, the numbers are a little larger and all that, but other than that, it's a thing. Next. Right, so next up we have Centipede, I believe. Yes, Centipede. This is the Atari 7800 version, which is nice. So you have a game that actually looks like Centipede and not just a bunch of blocks pretending to be Centipede, like in the 2600 version. And this is what you expect. This is a fairly good approximation of the 7800 version, which we'll look at in a little bit. Obviously, there's a bit of that NES-ness to it, but, you know, graphically it looks the part. Almost kind of sort of sounds the part. Controls quite fine for the most part. Obviously, Centipede used to use a trackball in its arcade original. And it's easy to fuck up here, naturally, if you're not paying attention. But no, this is a perfectly fine version of Centipede being played on this Atari Flashback unit. And just for comparison's sake, here's the 7800 version, which in all honesty, if we're going to look at it, it's not that bad of a transfer from 7800 to Flashback. There's differences in the fonts and obviously the sound effects, but in terms of recreating the sprites and all that, it's not bad. And the movement's pretty good. The controls on the 700 version is a little better. Still not a trackball, but still better than what you would get from the Flashback's rather inferior joysticks. But enough about that. We can move on to the next game, which is, I believe, Crystal Castles, which is the 2600 version based on the arcade game of the same name. You control Bentley Bear in a various number of castles and crystals and caves and stuff, and you collect all the crystals and stuff. But anyways, the Flashback version of Crystal Castle sucks, everybody, and it all boils down to the controls. The controls are gimped here. Diagonal movement, which is the key thing to maneuvering these mazes and caverns, whatever you want to call it, that's terrible. That's wretched. The controller is no help. Either that or it's something in the programming. But for whatever reason, the controls in this version is wretched. And it wasn't this bad on the 2600 version, which we'll look at later. And yeah, fun fact, this was the first time playing Crystal Castles. I had not played the 2600 version until years after this. I came across this version, and I thought this was a bad game. When I played the 2600 version, you know what? Let's cut to that right now. Play a quick round of Crystal Castles on 2600, and the controls are much smoother here. You do get stuck in the corner still, but it's not so bad. It's not as bad as the Flashback version. Yeah, controls are much smoother, and you could jump around quite nicely. Not a big deal. It's entirely playable on the 2600, and the mazes even change color when you go through them, which is not the case on the Flashback version, I don't think. And also the layout is slightly different as far as the HUD is concerned. Anyways, that's Crystal Castles on 2600 next. Anyways, moving on from that bit of depression, we've got Desert Falcon. This is the Atari 7800 version of Desert Falcon. They could have gone with the 2600 version. They didn't. They made the sensible option and went with the superior version of Desert Falcon. Which isn't to say that Desert Falcon is a great game. We looked at it earlier this year. But the 7800 version is the one to go for, I suppose. Anyways, this Flashback version ain't too shabby. It's a fairly good recreation. Doesn't sound the part, obviously. It sounds very much NES sounding, which is to be expected if you're playing on an NES on a chip. And there's a bit more flicker, I think, but other than that, no, it's okay. It plays fine for the most part. Again, the controls don't help all that much, but that could be the controller as well. And let's switch to the 7800 version, and I will give them credit. The font matches that. The font is the same as both versions. Graphically, personally, other than a couple minor color differences, it doesn't look all that far off. I think the only thing that really gives it away is the slightly wider resolution, although that's probably the hardware more than anything. And also the colors. Other than that, the sound effects. But no, it's a fairly decent recreation. That's sort of betrayed by the controllers, but again, not much you could do in that front. Because you can't swap out controllers for something else because of the connections and also stuff. But, whatever. It is what it is. Desert Falcon. Not one of the better 700 shooters, but more than serviceable. Next. Okay, from one 700 so-and-so game to a genuine classic on the console of sorts, we've got Food Fight, where you control a little boy who has to eat a ice cream cone before it melts and try to avoid being slobbered by food or caught by chefs and whatever, because otherwise all the food on screen gets tossed your way. The hitboxes are a bit suspect, but other than that, it's a respectable, it looks the part at least. It almost sounds the part. Obviously, there's a bit of NES-ness to the sound quality, but that's to be expected when you're playing on NES on a chip hardware, I guess. But, yeah, Food Fight's a good game. This is a fairly good port. The controls are not fantastic, and neither are the hitboxes. Again, I think those hitboxes are a bit suspect. But, anyway, let's switch over to the 7800 version. The original cartridge version from back in the day, not the re-release or the one on Atari 50 or whatever the case may be, and the Flashback version does. We'll give the Flashback version credit. It comes closest to matching the graphics of this version, although it did come close with Centipede as well. This one plays a little smoother. The hitboxes are a little more forgiving. It's not quite tile-based or anything like that, which the NES version of stuff is. I mean, the Flashback version, sorry. We can't kill the illusion that this is not an NES on a chip. This is genuine Atari software, or not really. Okay, I think you get the point right now. Next. And so after a couple of 700 games, we are driving back into the 2600 realm with Gravitar, a game that I will fully admit I have not fully grasped the concept of. You drive a little ship around, you try to land on things, I suppose, or a UFO blows you up. Anyways, yeah, so this is beyond my comprehension. I would like to one day not run into the sun and die. But, yeah, you go to one of these planets or stations. I guess you dock on it, you get stuff, and you blow up space stations and whatever. I don't know. Somebody more well-versed in Gravitar would probably tell you how this game works better than I could. Maybe one day we'll give this thing a proper shot and see what it's all about. But for now, we could only just point at it and laugh at the toward gameplay on screen. And we'll do the same for the 2600 version just to compare and contrast. Though let's be honest, the gameplay on this side of the fence is not going to be any better, regardless of whether the controls are any better or not. It looks the part at least, and it plays a little better, I guess, but I don't know. Gravitar is one of those games I never could quite figure out, and I don't think I ever will. Maybe one day we'll venture down that road, but for now, we shall just move on to the next game on this list. Next up, we have Boo! Haunted House, where you control a pair of eyeballs and you have to get things. And you're golden wad. You're not a meat wad, you're a golden wad. Nobody's going to get that. Anyways, this kind of looks the part. I don't know. It shouldn't take much effort to create a bunch of solid objects and stuff like that and stuff. I don't know, it's Haunted House. It's a 2600 classic, and it looks the part. Almost sounds the part. Again, you got the NES quality sound in there, but which is it's doesn't need to be said, but I don't know, it's okay for the most part. Let's play the 2600 version just to compare. And so now this is the 2600 version, obviously. The Meatwad character, for lack of a better term. Meatwad's reference to a cartoon character of an old Cinemassacre thing, I believe. I don't recall. Anyways, it's the right brown color rather than the yellow color. Though the yellow color on the Flashback version looks better, I guess, better than brown. But the sound effects are a little more pleasant, which, again, saying this for an Atari game compared to something on NES quality hardware, I guess, or lack thereof, or I don't know. I don't know how you would term this, but sounds nicer, at least. Anyways, we'll play through the. We'll get to the end of the game, such as it is, and we'll move on afterwards. Enjoy the flashing lights, everyone. Hope you didn't get a seizure from that. Next. All right, next up, I believe we have Millipede. Yes, we got Millipede for the 2600. So you got the 2600 version of Millipede and the 700 version of Centipede, and both versions sound the same because both consoles pretty much use the same sound processing, more or less, which allows for the backwards compatibility of the 700 of the toys. Anyways, so they both use the same sound effect. They both play the same wave similarly. Obviously, Millipede has, differences and stuff. I want you to note the sound effects. Now, again, both Centipede and Millipede use the same similar sound effects because they use similar sound processing. But the sound effects, some of the sound effects in this version sound similar to the NES version of Millipede. And we'll play a little bit of that. So we got Millipede on the NES, not included on the Flashback. This is a cartridge release from HAL. And you got similar sound effects. Obviously, more advanced sound on this NES port. But some of the sound effects are the same. This isn't a bad port of Millipede, by the way, all things considered. You know, as good as a version as you could get on NES, I think. And there you go. I died. Yeah, so they share similar sound effects between the NES and the Flashback version. And now let's cut to the 2600 version. Naturally, right off the bat, the one thing you notice that there's no annoying yellow frame around the playfield. It's nice and black and spread out and stuff. And there's also different sound effects for the gameplay, which is to be expected by this point. But other than that, it certainly looks the part for the most part. Even the font is almost resembling that of the vintage release. So they almost nailed it. 2600 version features a bit more flicker, but that's about it really. So anyways, moving right along. Well, next up we have the last 700 game to be featured on the console, and they definitely saved the worst for last. It's our old friend, our old pal, Planet Smashers. The classic 700 title. Hey, at least the title theme sounds better, for what it's worth. Granted, that's not saying a whole lot. For those of you who have not played Planet Smashers on the 7800, you haven't heard how it sounds like originally. Enjoy the next 30 seconds of audio. Was that pleasant to the ears? Was that really pleasant to your ears to listen to that constantly? Well, if you think it sounds any better on NES, well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but yeah, have fun. Look, the best thing I could say about this version is that it at least looks the part. They might have shrunk in the title screen a bit, but it at least looks the part. It also kind of sounds the part too, I'm afraid, which is not a good thing, but there's only so much you could do. Anyways, next. Right, so now that we got all the 700 games out of the way, unfortunately, on a sour note, we got Saboteur, which was a bit of a big deal back when this system was released, because this was an unreleased game, unless you count the one A-Team game, of which this was just a redress of. But you know, anyways, you play a character. This was apparently a sequel to Yar's Revenge, which we'll get to. Well, they've saved the best for last, obviously, you know, going in alphabetical order. But yeah, Saboteur is a bit of an interesting game. You have a couple stages that play differently. And you shoot things, and they shoot back. And then another stage, you're bouncing things off another thing, and this and that. And this used to be a big deal because it was unreleased, and this was the first time it saw official release. It was on this Flashback console. And now it's on every Atari compilation since the dawn of time. In fact, I believe it's on one of the recent ones. We'll sample some emulated 2600 footage in a little bit so we could compare and contrast. And so here we got Saboteur for 2600 via Atari 50. Like I said, they released this on every compilation and Flashback Unix since then. And, no fade outs, no fade ins, straight from one scene to another. And the sound effects are much cleaner, much nicer, which for Atari is quite nice. There's a bit of the second stage where you bounce the things off the thing and you have to fill the holes. And if you manage to accomplish that before time runs out, or if time runs out, not well versed in Saboteur. Sometimes it's not one of those games I play often, but you do get a rocket that launches, and then you shoot the rocket in the third stage, and then the whole thing loops and you go back to the very beginning. That's a very nice rocket by Atari standards. This did never not this, they turned this into an A-Teams game. And that's Saboteur on 2600. Now we can move on to the next game. All right, so next up we have Skydiver, a game that we recently looked at actually. And you try to land your little parachuter on the thing there, and wait, what's that? Hold on. Sinks into the ground? No, hold on. Play the 2600 version. This is the 2600 version of Skydiver. And, okay, yeah. So, the 2600 version, your parachuter goes splat if he misses the platform, which is better than sinking into the ground, but whatever. Other than that, gameplay-wise, it's fine. It looks the part, save for the corpse not being around when you crash, but other than that, it looks fine, I guess, I suppose. Colors are a little darker, obviously, but there's not much to this game. You just drop your guy on the platform, try to take the wind into account, and that's about it, really. And, that's the 2600 version. Not much difference there. Maybe sound effects are different, but that's about it. So, anyways, next. Next up on the list, we have Solaris for the Atari 2600, released in 1986. This would have been about a year into the lifespan of the NES. And Solaris was something of a high concept, a rather ambitious game for the 2600, where you controlled a ship and you basically had a star map that you could warp to different sectors, explore planets, rescue humans, and fight enemy invaders, and navigate asteroid fields, things of that nature. A fairly high concept, fairly ambitious, one of the highlights of the 2600 library. And this flashback version is kinda, sort of okay. If this was your first time playing it, you'd be like, it's okay, it's fine. But then you play the 2600 version, and that's a revelation. In fact, just take a look at how smoothly the animation is going as you're flying over the horizon, over the planet's surface. And now looking how quickly the planets zoom in, nice and smooth without any choppiness or anything like that. And the warp effect. I mean, look at this. This is on vintage Atari 2600 hardware. And I think they had a little more memory to play with, and did a bit of bank switching and stuff like that, if I recall correctly. So they used some more advanced techniques to get this thing working on vintage 2600 hardware, which was almost a decade old by that point. But still, there are things you could do on a 2600 that on the NES-based hardware, the flashback version, kind of struggles with due to different techniques and stuff. But still, Solaris is like one of those games where if you take the time to sit down and you learn how to play the game properly, is quite an experience. One of these days we got to sit down and we got to give this game a proper look, because it is one of the highlights of the latter day 2600 releases, in all honesty there. But that's another story for another time. Next game up the list, 3 more to go. We've got Sprint Master, which is another late Atari 2600 release from 1988. It is a racing game, obviously, similar to the Super Sprint games that Williams or Atari Games or whoever used to put out. It's all mixed bag backs, and it's all a mixed bag. Anyways, you got 9 tracks. You race around a track. There's power-ups that you could pick up to improve traction and speed and things of that nature. Obviously, I can't play this game worth a damn. At least not this version, because this version is kind of crap. Because the controls are kind of crap. Yes, I will blame the controls. Fuck you. I don't care. I'm generally not good at this game, but I'm not this terrible. Anyways, 2600 version. Go. Okay, right, before we play the game, can we go back to the title screen on the Flashback version and listen to the song on that? Yeah, that sounds kind of lame. Let's go back to the 2600 version, play that again. That's nice and pleasant and all that. On Atari, no less. But yeah, that's a much more livelier opening title theme on vintage Atari hardware. Go figure. But yeah, again, you got 9 tracks. You could choose different road types, dirt, normal, that sort of thing, ice, surface types. And you can race up to 50 laps, that sort of thing, which is kind of nice. And yeah, again, not the greatest start, but hey, I can play the game a little better because the controls aren't total shit, like in the Flashback version. So I can almost manage, I may be able to manage a victory out of this basic track, despite my less than stellar performance, let's be honest here. Like I said, never been all that great at this game, but I think we might be able to pull out a win, and we can move on to our next game afterwards. Hoorays! Victory! Let's move on. Second to last game on the list, we have, I believe, Warlords, I believe. Yes, Warlords. Warlords is the 4-player version of Pong of sorts, kind of. A combination of Pong and Breakout. You bounce the ball around, you defend your fortress of sorts, and prevent your thing from being blown up, because if your thing is blown up, you lose. But if you blow up the other people's things, you win. Anyways, this originally used a paddle controller. This does not use a paddle controller because you don't have a paddle controller. And you can catch the ball and you can release it whenever you want with the button, which is kind of nice. And I don't know, it looks the part. I guess it almost sounds the part. Wish it played the part, but there's only so much you could do with a crappy controller. Anyway, here's the Atari 2600 version via the Atari Vault on PC, which allows me to use a mouse in place of the analog stick on an analog controller. And, you know, the mouse control is certainly a worthy substitute of the venerable paddle controller. I actually prefer the mouse over the paddle, to be honest with you, but that's neither here nor there. The point is, yeah. Next. And last, but certainly not least, we have the classic, the perennial Atari 2600 classic, Yar's Revenge. I think, you know, you think Atari 2600, this is one of the games that popped to mind. And it certainly looks the part, plays the part pretty much, almost sounds the part. Again, you have that distinct NES air to it that you can't really put out of your head because of the, especially all things considered. But here's the 2600 version, just for comparison's sake. It, you know, again, 2600 version kind of moves a bit smoother, I think, but other than that, not a bad conversion, all things considered. But, yeah, I think that would be like a general belief for all the games on this package. I mean, they certainly tried to replicate as best as they could with what they had, but what they had is a pale imitation of what this was supposed to be, which is a collection of classic Atari games as you remembered them from back in the day. And this was certainly not that. Fortunately, they would improve on the formula with later iterations. As a matter of fact, I have the Atari Flashback 2, which we'll look at in another video. But for now, we'll just close the book on this with the last live shot, and then we'll call it a day. So.
Okay, and that was the Atari Flashback, the original Atari Flashback classic game console plug-and-play system from 2004. And, well, yeah, NES on a chip, 20 Atari games that kinda, sort of looked the part, maybe played the part if you had better quality controllers on hand, but not quite the same thing and not quite authentic. So, I don't recall the performance of this thing, but apparently it did well enough that they made a sequel console. And this is the sequel console, the Atari Flashback 2. And we're going to look at this next week.
Hey, no we're not. We're going to look at it later today. Around 6-ish. See you soon!